Summary of Bare-Knuckle Negotiation. Savvy Tips and True Stories from the Master of Give and Take. By Raoul Felder. Negotiating Basics. The toughest, most challenging negotiations involve high-profile celebrity divorces. Who gets the kids? The house? The artwork, stocks and bonds? Negotiating those issues under the emotional pressure of a divorce takes a steady hand, a calm mind and a bag of tricks. Power is in play in any negotiation. A weak party is battling a strong party. The weak party had better be a skilled negotiator, because honeyed words and guileful tactics provide the weak party's only chance of prevailing. In criminal cases, defense lawyers often have a weak hand. The whole criminal justice system favors prosecutors. The police have gathered evidence for prosecutors, the judge and jury seem disposed to believe prosecutors, and the odds are heavily weighted to conviction. Often, the only chance a defense lawyer has to help his or her client is to negotiate a plea bargain. Note the words negotiate and bargain. Most divorce lawyers represent women, because divorcing husbands, at least in high-profile cases, often prefer to use their corporate attorney or someone else they know. Fortunately for the women, the corporate attorneys are often poor negotiators. Power shifts to the weak when the weak command better negotiating skills. The basic commandments of negotiation are: be detached. Never get so attached to any one thing that you lose perspective. Keep a clear head and focus. Don't make up your mind in advance. Be flexible. Listen more than you talk. You learn when you listen, not when you talk. Always keep your promises and commitments. Credibility is an important asset. Be willing to make trade-offs. You won't get everything you try to get, so know in advance what you're willing to sacrifice and for what price. When the facts change, change your goals and change your mind. Don't be afraid to admit a mistake. Knowledge is power. Learn everything you can about your antagonist. Never yield control of your fate to a third party. Never agree to arbitration. Your fate may depend on what the arbitrator had for breakfast, whether he fought with his wife, or some other unpredictable factor irrelevant to your situation. You can negotiate anything, anywhere. Even fancy stores will negotiate with you. Salespeople usually can't decide, so ask for the buyer or the manager and offer a deal. Ask. You won't get what you don't ask for. Ask for more. There is a horn of plenty. Check it out. If you're a buyer, ask the seller to throw in freebies. If you look in the horn of plenty, you may find free delivery, free service, an extra discount if you buy two and so on. If you're a seller, try to get more out of the buyer. Maybe the buyer will buy a warranty, or buy two items or finance the purchase at an interest rate favorable to you. Keep asking and keep pushing. You'll be surprised what you find in the horn of plenty. Make sure that all commitments are in writing. Never underestimate the power of walking out. Remember to take your stuff. Use words like flexible and reasonable. Try to seem both. Signal your antagonist that you expect him or her to be both. This sets a good tone for the negotiations. Have a repertoire of nonverbal signals you can use to communicate with your allies or teammates while keeping the communication secret from your antagonists. Opponents. You may have to kill your antagonists, metaphorically speaking, but do so in such a way that they'll still deal with you again. Watch for any signs of weakness. Watch their eyes. In a divorce negotiation, author and trial attorney Raoul Felder often looks at a husband and says, "I couldn't care less about the fact that you have unreported income or that you're supporting a mistress, or a boyfriend, or a girlfriend, whatever." He watches the husband's eyes to see if any of those items caused any nervousness or flinching. That's the weak spot. Knowing the weak spot makes it possible to be ruthless later. Once Felder was negotiating with a diabetic. He knew that if the diabetic didn't get food at certain times, his blood sugar would go out of balance, an uncomfortable and disorienting experience. As the negotiations wore on, the diabetic asked to have food delivered to the author's office, where negotiations were taking place. When the delivery arrived, the receptionist said a parcel had come. Felder went out, signed for the food, and threw it in the trash, then re-entered the negotiation room. When the diabetic asked, later, about the food, Felder pretended to phone the restaurant and complain, and then placed another order for food. The food arrived. The receptionist said that some papers had come from a judge. Felder went out, signed for the food, paid the bill and threw the food away. Shortly, the diabetic got so uncomfortable that he agreed to a deal that was very favorable to Felder's client. No matter how tough or devious you happen to be, never make a threat without being prepared to act on it. You may win a battle but lose the war. Winning something you want may cost you more in the long term. In a divorce negotiation, winning a better property settlement may mean making your ex into an enemy for life, which will have consequences for your children. In an employment situation, when you have your boss over a barrel and take full advantage, understand that your boss won't be over a barrel forever. Over or underestimating your antagonist is dangerous. Overestimate and you will cow yourself. Underestimate and you will blindside yourself. Distraction. Know how and when to create a distraction. A distraction in the middle of a negotiation may give you time to think. You may, accidentally, knock over a water glass or drop a file. You may want to introduce a tangent so that the discussion moves away from an unfavorable course. If you are in your office, your secretary may call with an urgent matter just when you need an interruption. That's one reason you want to control the location of the negotiation. Whenever possible, have it take place on your home field. Control the distractions and do not let your adversary distract you. When the adversary begins to launch into a long-winded explanation of how and why he or she arrived at this or that position, cut it short, say you're not interested in anything but the bottom line. Don't let your adversary lead the discussion into unfamiliar, uncomfortable or unfavorable areas. Detachment. Never want anything so much that you lose perspective. Everything has a price and for the right price, you'll make a trade. Divorce, a highly charged emotional confrontation, often leads people to focus on revenge instead of on making the best of things. Wanting revenge often leads people to make insane choices. For example, a judge ordered a man to sell all marital possessions and divide the proceeds with his ex-wife, so he sold a $10,000 car for $20. In the high-profile divorce case of Jack Welch, the former General Electric CEO, his embittered wife told newspaper reporters about his cushy retirement package. As a result of the negative publicity, Welch gave back some of his retirement pay and benefits. The bitter ex-wife reduced her ex-husband's assets. But, since she couldn't get a share of what he no longer had, she may have hurt herself more than she hurt him. Don't trade off something worthwhile for something that's not worthwhile. Revenge may give you emotional satisfaction, but wouldn't living well be better? Confidentiality agreements are another bad trade-off. They're not worth paying for because they never work since you really can't enforce them. Credibility. Credibility is your most important asset in a negotiation. If your antagonists don't believe you, nothing you say will help. Dress appropriately and don't be shy about theatrics. Try to remember names. Don't lose your temper, although theatrical displays of wrath are perfectly useful when carefully timed. You carry credibility throughout your life. You may benefit by pointing out an error that's not in your favor. The trust you build will benefit you later. Walking out. Walking out of the negotiation is one of the most effective tactics. Make your walkout stylish and dramatic. Make a speech of carefully chosen words just before you go out the door. Your words effectively leave the door open for your re-entry. You want to shame and discomfit your antagonist. Never walk out in a hot temper. Always keep your cool and remember to take your belongings. Of course, you may want your opponent to think you are in a state of anger, but never lose control. Times to walk out include: when your antagonist gives you an unacceptable take-it-or-leave-it ultimatum. When negotiations have dragged on for a long time and you want to send a signal that you are abandoning them. Your antagonists, having invested a great deal at this point, and with much at stake, may well ask you to come back on your terms. When you are not overplaying your hand. A famous walkout by New York elevator operators merely encouraged landlords to convert their buildings to automatic elevators. The conversion was costly, but it eliminated elevator operators. They overplayed their hand. Pacing. Timing may not be everything in a negotiation, but it is important. Influence the pace of negotiations by taking advantage of constraints on your antagonist. For example, some attorneys prefer to set negotiations with religiously observant Jews for noon on Friday. Because observant Jews begin the Sabbath observance on Friday at sunset, they will be eager to leave a Friday meeting on time and, therefore, are under pressure to agree. Divorce lawyers may set negotiations on child custody issues around school enrollment deadlines. The deadline pressures the parties to agree so little Joey gets into school. Recognize that some situations may require you to adjust to an unfamiliar and uncomfortable pace, based on someone else's social customs. British law moves quite slowly, but nothing moves as slowly as a negotiation with Arabs. Be prepared. Divorce negotiations should be easy. A fair and equitable division of assets, when both parties know what the assets are, should be a matter on which reasonable people with good calculators could agree. But a lot of antagonism is involved in a divorce. Emotions take over and reason goes out the window. In business negotiations, on the other hand, certain laws and regulations come into consideration. For example, insurance companies must set up a reserve on their books to cover possible claims. In some cases, the companies set aside bigger reserves than they expect to pay out, because the money in reserve is tax-deductible as an expense. In theory, the company will be paying the reserve out to claimants. Knowing the amount of the reserve can help you calculate what the insurance company expects the claim to be worth, and can give you a guideline in negotiating a settlement or pursuing a lawsuit. When you make your demand in a negotiation, always start with a number considerably higher than you would be willing to accept. This is standard practice in negotiations. Whatever number you give, your antagonists will consider it much higher than you are willing to take. Thus, starting with your real number would put you at a considerable disadvantage. Begin high, and you can always come down. Start low, and it's almost impossible to climb up. When picking your target number, be clear about what is reasonable. Wives often overestimate their husband's earning potential or wealth. A man whose business depends on his reputation, looks or personal service, may not be worth much as an economic proposition. He could meet with an accident, burn out or quit working so hard, and then his income would dry up. He's not in the same position as a guy who owns a thriving business. Know what you are dealing with when you begin to assign numbers.